Welcome to Reinvent and the Reinvent the Humanities to Change the World series, which is done in partnership with Georgetown University. I'm Pete Leiden. I'm the founder of Reinvent, and I'll be conducting the interview today. Now, today we have Norberto Grzywacz. And Norberto is himself a neuroscientist, is the most general way to talk about him, but in fact he's got a background in physics, cognitive science, cellular biology, biomedical engineering, computational modeling. He's clearly on the more technical engineering sense, and that's been his career, and we're going to talk to him about that side of his life. But he's also very recently been appointed as the Dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences at Georgetown University, and in that capacity he's overseeing work both in the sciences and math, but also in the humanities. And so he's in a particularly interesting position to talk about the value of both and how they work together, and that's a lot about what we'll be talking about today. So Norberto, I want to say thank you for coming, and we're looking forward to the interview here.
Thank you, Peter. My pleasure.
All right. Now, so why don't we start with your own career? Talk a little bit about your background. I mean, I gave a kind of very top line, but tell about what you've studied, and also, if you can think about it as you go, well, just tell us a little bit about your background, and we'll weave in how the humanities might have played a role in that over time.
I am happy to do that. Actually, the humanities come really late in the process, and you'll see how, as I explain, how they finally arrived. My background, my studies were originally in physics and mathematics. I started very technical. Towards my PhD, I made a switch to biophysics. I started focusing in brain science, but with a physical approach. I did those studies at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. I moved after my doctorate to MIT, and I spent there 7 years, first as a postdoc and then as a research faculty. The projects I had at MIT switched a little bit. I was doing biophysics before. At MIT, I spent some time in the artificial intelligence lab and the brain and cognitive science department, and picked up skills in other areas. I became a little more facile with computer science and with cognitive areas and so on. Then after MIT, I moved to a non-profit organization in San Francisco called Smith-Catwell Eye Research Institute. My field of research was vision. So I was interested in how people see, and also interested in blind people don't see, and what can we do perhaps to help them. And that non-profit organization has a focus on those two aspects, on vision and blindness. I spent about 10 years working there, eventually decided that I wanted to go back to academia and move to the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. Became a professor in those areas. Actually, my appointment was in the Department of Biomedical Engineering and at the Neuroscience Graduate Program. Eventually, I became part of the neuroscience, the director of the Neuroscience Graduate Program, and that is where more and more my focus became increasingly more interdisciplinary, in part because the faculty there had focuses that went from hardcore science like molecular biology all the way to psychology and to cognitive science. And at the end, at the last 5 years of my time at USC, I became the chair of the Department of Biomedical Engineering. So I had a really broad background in all of this, mostly in technical sciences. Now, what happened is that as I progressed, I realized that some projects, some problems can only be solved by having really broad teams of people. So I mentioned, for example, my interest in blindness. And we at USC had 2 or 3 projects to try to think of how we might be able to cure blindness, in fact. So blindness is interesting. The brain, the visual part of the brain starts like a camera, like a photographic camera, and then there are parts of the brain that function more like a computer. They interpret what is in the camera to reach conclusions about what we are seeing. When people go blind, more often than not, the problem is that the camera stops working. It's not that, so these are the cells called the photoreceptors, which is like essentially has the role of a camera. It's not in the part of the brain that interprets things. So there are ideas, various ideas of how perhaps we could fool the brain to think that the camera is still working. And what you do in one of these big projects I was a member, the idea was you put a small camera on your goggles, in your glasses, and then take the image with that camera and then broadcast to the eye where a set of implanted electrodes would stimulate the neurons that are alive, in the same way or similar way as the normal process of vision stimulates those neurons. And so suddenly these neurons will become active and will fool the brain to think that in fact they are seeing. Turns out that the system actually works, and right now, again, this is a very long project. There is now FDA approval for this system. There are, I think, about 150 people implanted with this in the world. But what it brought to me is the following. You know, that team of people could only cure blindness, if I can put it this way, by combining the strength of different areas. So you needed engineers to build the device, you needed physicians to implant the device into the eye, you needed people that understood about cell biology, because if you put anything in the eye responds and tries to reject what you put. And actually you needed psychologists, because after the person starts saying, I see something, the big question is, what do you see? And you need people that understand the human side of things. At that point of my career, I realized that there, as I say, there are problems in the world that you can only really tackle if you have this combination of multiple areas of skills. And Georgetown University had an opening for the dean of the graduate school, and the opening was focusing on issues related to interdisciplinary studies. My proposal when I came to interview was, why don't we focus on the big problems, you know, the problems of the day, the socially difficult things to tackle. So for example, environment and climate change, or the fact that the world population is aging very rapidly, and perhaps we'll have to find ways to take care of this older population, so the problem of aging, problems related to social economy, and so on. And I realized that in order to tackle these problems, I would have to go even beyond the science. So I was an expert in helping build teams that were interdisciplinary. Suddenly I said, well, why should I stop there? So for example, the problem of aging, you need psychologists to treat this elderly population. You need social scientists, you need economists, you need physicians. You also, turns out, need humanists, and the part of the reason is the narrative and the way that they express themselves and the way that they can feel useful and happy have a lot to do with, often with expression and art. And so suddenly I realized that these big problems really cannot be tackled by a single discipline, and my goal became to find this combination. And suddenly I began to realize, and this was how I began, let me say, humanities became part of my interest, is realizing how important they were. And I have further examples to do that. So this is my background. It's a long explanation. My background started in sciences. I am now the dean of the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, and I take that very seriously. It is really about arts and sciences and hopefully how they make partner to solve really tough problems in the world.
Fascinating. No, that's fantastic. Well, so people, the multidisciplinary kind of approach is even among scientists, I think, is increasingly kind of understood as necessary. And you could imagine the also, the kind of social sciences is kind of closer to science thinking and, economics or sociology, political science. But it's that further stretch into the humanities, which it sounds like you've made. Do you find that people kind of, at least, or how unusual is that, I guess, your perspective coming out of the sciences to actually have that kind of appreciation for the humanities, and how much work do you have to kind of pull your scientific and technical kind of colleagues into that appreciation?
Fairly unusual, I think. There is a big gap between the domains, and it's unfortunate. There is a lot of problem of language and culture, of how humanists and scientists and social scientists see what they do, and it's difficult. Also, and this is important, I want to emphasize this, I am hoping that we can create a more engaged form of academia, a university that actually tackles really important socially complex problems. And I think that exactly like the humanities may have resistance to this, so do the scientists. In some respect, it's not different in that regard. I go around and talk to my colleagues at different departments at university, and I pitch these ideas, and I often have reaction saying things like, no, I'm really interested in certain aspects of physics. I don't want to spend time tackling social issues. Or I go to, say, the history department and I say, well, but then how do we study the French Revolution or other interesting aspects of history? And my answer is, I don't think, I shouldn't be misconstrued of saying that I, in fact, want to eliminate those things. I think these are important endeavors. We want to know about the French Revolution, and we want to know about Chaucer, and we want to know about modern issues in philosophy or particle physics, even if they don't have an immediate impact in society. It's just that we have an opportunity, perhaps, to bind those people that actually want to do this in creating this kind of programs. And so now the issue becomes, how do you overcome this language barrier, this cultural barrier between the disciplines? And that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of conversations and meetings. But there are people that are incredibly bright and willing and eager to engage, and that's what makes my life easier. So I have had examples of people wanting to create programs in the humanities that are what they would call engaged humanities, that are actual humanities that are not just the traditional form of the humanities, but in humanities with a focus to society. I had people in the arts wanting to do that. One conversation I had this week, and it was actually incredibly interesting. One of the programs we are creating at Georgetown is a focus on the use of science and technology for creating goodwill among people, diplomacy, if you will. So imagine, if you have two countries, you could send ambassadors and consuls, but you could also exchange knowledge, and knowledge creates goodwill. Turns out that we could think the same exact way about culture and art. You can actually create goodwill by exchanging culture and art. And this week I had a meeting with one of the professors here at Georgetown University, Dr. Goldman, Derek Goldman, and that actually was his proposal. Why not make international art with a political focus that creates what you call cultural diplomacy? And suddenly you can see that there is commonalities. There is differences, but there are commonalities. I don't expect Dr. Goldman to be talking about exchange of, say, biomedical technology, but the issue of exchanging knowledge for peace, for obtaining better understanding between people is common, and it's not different in art or in science. So that is the common goal. So the point, what I'm trying to say is, you have to have a goal. The goal has to feel worthwhile to the people participating, and when they feel that is a worthwhile goal, they will make the effort. You don't really have to, to push them. And that's how my approach has been.
That's fascinating. Now, so without being too stereotypical here, it feels to me like the sciences and the technical kind of engineering kind of fields are kind of more naturally poised to push beyond academia. I mean, I'm sitting here in Silicon Valley where, creating companies all the time off of kind of new insights in science and technology and engineering. But the humanities at least have a reputation, I'm just not, I don't know to what extent you hold it, of being potentially a little more insular, not as kind of engaged with the outside world. But yet you kind of talk there about both sides being reluctant to kind of solve these big problems. But are there any particular challenges you think around the humanities that you're picking up as you kind of engage your new kind of your job there?
Well, being insular is really a very good description of the problem. And I would say it has to do with comfort zone, and I think that is no difference in the science. In my early career, was using physics to get results in biomedical sciences, in neurosciences, and it was hard for me as a young scientist not to talk in terms of equations or scientific terms, because we are afraid of making mistakes, right, or things that are dumb, or so if I stay within my equations, I am going to be precise, and there is not going to be an argument about whether. I think this similar thing happens in the humanities. You are trained to do something, you believe in the value of what you have been trained to do. There is an issue of comfort zone. Can I really go outside the humanities and stay good at what I do? And I fear the same way. I mean, as a scientist, if I'm going to tackle the problem of aging, for example, and I had no knowledge of aging, I'm going to do dumb things until I learn. And so people fear. I think it's natural. I think it's common. And I don't think it's unique to the humanities or to the sciences. I think it is a natural human condition. I have to say, because of this transition to this position, I decided to switch my research direction. I told you in the beginning I have worked in vision and in blindness, but I thought, okay, maybe if I go to Georgetown, I have an opportunity to try something new I haven't tried. And for the first time in my career, I decided that the subject, and I can explain a little more, would be related to what we call neurostatics. The idea is, can you explain the feeling of statics, of feeling good about a piece of art from the brain point of view? And so I decided that I would add to the team an artist. So one of my postdocs is actually not a scientist, and is an artist. And I have to tell you, the conversations are difficult. Not difficult in the sense of we are, have animosity towards each other. It's difficult because we use different languages and we use different cultures. It is just a matter of giving it time, I think. So, for example, these artists who come to me and say, when I paint, is making balance in the frame is really important. Okay, so I'm a physicist. I know what balance means, right? mean, there is a fulcrum, and I put a weight on the right, I put a weight on the left. If the weights multiplied by the distance to the fulcrum are equal, then I have balance. But that's not what artists mean. That's something else there. So I push him and I say, okay, so tell me, what does balance mean? And he thinks and he tries to tell me, and then he says, oh, balance is composition. So, okay, so as a scientist, what do I mean by composition? And so the language is a natural issue. I think the most important thing, and I'm being frank here, I think there is insularity in both science and social sciences and humanities, but I think the most important thing is the will to try. And I'm not trying to be funny or anything. I decided I wanted to understand a little bit more what art, the feeling of statics from a scientific perspective. And how could I try this if I stay just as a scientist and not understanding what statics mean to other people? And so it's really important to make the effort. And what I have been finding is there are people, both in the sciences and social sciences and humanities, that don't want to do it, and I don't fault them. I mean, I understand them perfectly. And then there are people who actually want to try. And they pay a price, because if you do this, you are not going always to be the deepest necessarily, but you are going to open new frontiers, is how I view this, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So this artist wanted to do this. I have a student in my lab wanting to do this, and so we have a lot of fun. Not that we understand each other all the time, but it's been really good. And I think that is the issue that I feel is the will. And again, there are departments, there are disciplines in humanities and sciences, and they have reason to be. They are important. They are the standards of quality. So, if I am a physicist and I'm doing physics, I want physicists to judge because they know what good physics is. If I am a historian, I want historians to judge my work, right? So there is reasons for the disciplines. I'm not actually saying we should give up on them. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are some problems in the world, and I think those tend to be the most important problems in the world that you really want people in different domains to be working together to tackle. Less, we are not going to solve those problems. We have to be able to try. And that's basically the effort has been. And as you say, some people don't want to be part, and that's absolutely fine. And I'm not even critical of them. I completely, the things you see coming from humanities or sciences are so impressive. How can we not be impressed? But that's not the goal of the programs we are playing with, and it's just that is the point.
Well, it's interesting you say that about the trying. Again, I've been out here for 20 years in kind of the Silicon Valley ethos. And one of the things that actually is kind of cliched, but it's actually true, is that failure is not a stigma out here. I mean, in fact, in a weird way, it's a badge that you tried you swing, and if you didn't quite make it, you're not really held. It's not a bad thing, actually. Many entrepreneurs kind of fail in their first 2 or 3 and come into the next one. And I do think that's something that I think broader than you or Georgetown or whatever. There is a kind of academic environment with tenure and all these other things that might not foster that as well, that you might be up against in terms of that spirit of like, well, let's just freaking try it. You know what I mean? Do you find that actually from your point of view?
Yeah, no, I think you have a good point. It's interesting, read an article in almost any domain, certainly in science, and you never see the failures. I mean, you see the successes. And I tell you, I mean, we start a project, and out of 10 ideas, maybe 1 will work, maybe 2 will work. And the same thing happens here. We are trying different programs, and I go with the spirit that out of every 10 ideas, maybe I'll add 1 or 2 to work. But you see, that's the point. If you can get 2 important ideas to work, it's worth it. So yes, academia has often a fear of failure. I think maybe to appear dumb, like when we started this project in art, boy, I'm certain some of the things I said were so dumb because I knew little, but then we tested, we made measurements because that's what it is, a combination between arts and sciences, and suddenly we realized those things were dumb, and we move on to the next idea. There is a concept that I learned from engineering, and it's becoming really important now. Certainly near your neck of the woods at Stanford, for example, there is the D school, design school at the School of Engineering. One of the interesting concepts in the D school, if you think of design, is the following. You first need to understand what the problem is. So you have to empathize with the people needing a solution. So you don't invent a problem. Then what you do is define the problem, so you put it in quantities that you can understand, but the third step is called, not sure how they call it, I call it brainstorming, which is go to a board, write all the ideas that come to you, and make a long list before you decide on what ideas fail, and then you pilot them, right, and then you try. Science and humanities often don't work this way. You know, it's a different paradigm. I think the paradigm of design is going to become more and more relevant. The importance of failure cannot be denied. I mean, you have to have lots of ideas. Some are good and some are bad, and that is actually how we have to admit. And in some respect, it's even important to tell others what your failures were. So, you know, I tried these and didn't work for this reason. That is important knowledge. As important as, finally, I tried that and that worked. But, you know, we need to be sharing more what those failures are. Now, I completely agree with you. There's an intrinsic fear of failure in academia. It's very surprising because we know we do it. You know, it's funny to me.
Well, do you find, I mean, you were at USC before this and came to Georgetown. This kind of aspirational, let's solve the big challenges of our time, let's, you know, go beyond our academic areas. Did you find that resonated in Georgetown in a way that you didn't find in other kind of academic settings or in other environments that you're familiar with? Is there something going on that's a little different there from your point of view?
Absolutely, but I don't say that was worse or better in, say, what the spirit was at USC or at Georgetown. They are different. So just to remind you, I was a chair of a department of biomedical engineering for many years, and success there is measured in technological ideas, if you want. Students, if you ask them, they often are very entrepreneurial. And to them, it means starting maybe startup companies, having new technology. They want to help, but that's how they normally think. For many years, I was invited to give a speech to the students, especially to the freshmen at the beginning of the year, to talk about biomedical engineering, the future, and for many years my focus was on jobs. I would start my speech, say, look, this is a field, the field is booming, and your guys are in great shape to get jobs. And it's actually true, I wasn't lying. I had labor statistics to prove, and it is a booming field. But it's interesting what happened. And towards the end of my time at USC, I began being concerned with that, and I decided in my last speech, actually, to change the title of my presentation to the students. And I called that presentation the social responsibility of biomedical engineers. There was a change in me, I think, in part. And I thought, boy, I'm certainly going to be fired for this because you are supposed to talk about engineering or something. And so I did. I said, look, you are so privileged. You know, you are one of the best universities, best schools of engineering in the country, perhaps the world. You have access to all this technology, and you are all thinking to form new enterprises, and I'm sure they're going to help people. But you have an opportunity to actually have an impact in the world. And I went and showed them images of, like, imagine places where remote villages where medical equipment never reaches, or if they reach, there is no electricity to power those medical equipments, or there is no internet. And I said, that is incredibly useful. You are biomedical engineers, you can devise the future for those villages as well, as example, right? And what I was so surprised to discover is the students really resonated with this message. I had more students than in all my time at Georgetown come to my office to talk to me about this. So I think that the environment was different and was not better or worse. USC is a very entrepreneurial university, very forward-looking, really good quality. Georgetown is an entrepreneurial university, but when you come to Georgetown, you can sense a change in the conversation. There is a lot of common good talk, that the students ought to be thinking not just in what they will do for careers later, but in terms of what can they do for society and for the less privileged and so on. So to me, it resonated, but I think it was because I was changing and I felt the need to try these things. And suddenly I had a great opportunity that was given to me by Georgetown to come and try. Hopefully I won't disappoint them. I only moved in January, so I have been here less than a year. Hopefully it will be exactly like we dreamed. In other words, to create those graduate programs with these focuses that go all the way from the humanities to the sciences, not just because we want to go all the way from the humanities to the sciences, but because those particular choices, those particular scholars are the right ones to tackle those problems. Right? So if you want to talk about aging, you're not going to necessarily include philosophers, but you might include people from linguistics, people from history, or people from public policy that are really interested in the problem. So I hope I'm explaining.
Yeah, no, you're totally right.
Not about interdisciplinarity, it's more about what does it take to solve a problem. And let's pick the important ones. That's how I'm thinking of this.
Do you think, just to finish this this thread of this conversation, do you think there's something going different now in the early 21st century? The world is more connected. We're facing climate change, which is kind of an unprecedented challenge that really other previous societies in previous centuries really weren't wrapping their head around that scale of a problem. Do you think there's something different now that does kind of call on academia in a different way, particularly since it's one of the few institutions in the society where there are formally all these disciplines poised to work with each other potentially? Do you think there's something different going on now, and why it's no coincidence that you guys are now shifting these goals and you didn't do it 30 years ago or something like that? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's undeniable to many people that higher education in particular is in crisis, and a crisis that imperils its future in some respect. Internet and interconnectivity started putting out there lots of ways for people to learn. These ways are things like MOOCs and related endeavors. Those things are cheap. People can learn without paying the high cost of academia. And suddenly, universities need to feel the pinch that something needs to be done. You need to become more relevant. And in some respect, there are different people thinking different ways, new models of education, and then new models of what we need to be answering. And that is, you hear in many universities, the necessity to be engaged and to have more scholarship that is relevant. I think society is pressuring for it. I think universities are realizing they need to change, and hopefully we are reacting to the things soon enough and not too late. So I think yes, some big changes coming that already are here, and we need to to respond to those challenges.
Got you. Now, just and I love that idea too. And I hope you're successful in that. By the way, we need all hands on deck from my point of view. It's all hands on deck time. But just to kind of swing the story back to where we started, kind of in your own career. You mentioned neuroscience and your background in neuroscience, and you talked about this tuning into how the brain essentially deals with aesthetics, beauty, music, art. There's an interesting thread in this project that we've been having about people's concerns with artificial intelligence and robotics and kind of what are machines going to be able to do and what are humans and what's particularly human, and which kind of relates to the humanities and the kind of more effervescent kind of what is a human and what's a human brain and things. As a scientist who studies the brain, do you see kind of parts of the human brain that'll never be kind of replicated or never be emulated in kind of machine terms, or do you actually think it's closer than than some people actually think, that at some point we'll have machines that think? Anyhow, just thoughts on the kind of what's kind of robot proof or AI proof about the human brain as opposed to what can be mechanized? Go ahead.
I don't know if I can dare to tell you the answer to this one. The progress has been amazing in artificial intelligence in all realms. We are not there. Machines cannot do some of the things that we do. It's interesting. This was realized early. There are machines that play chess really well. They play now we can say machines have beaten the best chess player in the world, and so in some respect they overtook us. But there are no machines that can see as well as we do, or there are things that machines have not arrived. But I wouldn't sit here and say, no, that's impossible. I think in some respect, the more we understand about humanity, I feel the more we will be able. Just a second, sorry.
There's our machines. The machine heard you talking and it was going to disrupt you. It wanted to interrupt you.
Okay. So the machines, exactly. So you see, they're rebelling. I cannot deny. I mean, in some respect, we have, in terms of trying to understand humanity and how we think and how we feel, we don't really put boundaries on this. We are not. It's an effort for us to understand the full person and nature as a whole. So the project I was telling you before, this project is about trying to understand the feeling of statics, of pleasure, right? Many people would have said that perhaps art is something that is unreachable. The beauty of art and the beauty of statics, statics of what we feel when we see it. But I'm not convinced. I think everything is possible. At least everything we can start and see how far we go. I think it's a little bit, as a scientist, sometimes I have been seen as a bit weird when I sit with friends and let's say there is a really nice sunset and we are all enjoying the sunset, and I say to them, what this is, of course, is that the blue photons scatter less than the red photons, and what you're seeing is the scattering by ozone layer to our eyes. And of course, many of them look at me and say, oh, how weird this guy is. I mean, he's talking about that. But I find that really beautiful. I find that there is beauty in the feeling you have, but beauty in understanding the science as well. So, for us, the question to give you an example from this piece of research we are doing, so we said, okay, so is that possible to start understanding parts of art. What drives an artist when he's composing a painting, right? And so this is perhaps ultimate humanism, creativity at its best. But of course, that person doing that art is a person that has a brain and has the same organs that we all have. And so that means if we could understand that, it could be a window to the brain, or vice versa. Maybe a window to the brain will give us a window to understanding that. So this particular story we started investigating was a theory proposed probably around the mid-90s called neurostatics. Maybe it goes a little farther back, but the notion is this. The brain is designed to solve problems in the world, right? So for example, if a predator is coming towards you, you better know it's a predator, and you better start running or hide or climb a tree or something, because so you want to know the answers to these questions. So and so the brain is designed with certain things very well and with other things less well. So for example, one of the things we're really well designed to do is recognize people and expressions, because that we are a very social species. Humans are very social. And now think about a person in front of you. Persons have faces. Faces are very symmetrical. They're not exactly symmetrical, but they're very symmetrical. So symmetry turned out to be a major component of how our brain processes the world, because it's useful. It's useful to us as a species. Now, since the brain is so facile with symmetry, when you put something on canvas, it gives you a certain, is restful in some respect, because as you put it on canvas, when you look at the canvas, your brain it doesn't have to make a big effort to understand there is symmetry there. So the theory of neurostatic is saying the brain is designed for certain things, and statics, or part of statics we cannot explain all of statics, come because the brain feels comfortable with what is being composed in front. So that's a theory, right? Correct or incorrect, it's a theory, therefore, if it's a good theory, we can test it. So one of the things we decided to do was, okay, so let's start simple. So we decided to focus on portraits, which is a simple form of visual art, because there's only one person there, and the person is only in a few poses and so on. So I said, let's start with portraits, and let's actually see, let's measure in the portraits. Now we have computers, we can make fast measurements of whether the portraits are symmetric, or whether there is balance, in the sense that the same amount of stuff exists in two sides of a particular line, say the middle line in the portrait. We can measure complexity, which is related to the amount of information in the portrait, whether there's more or less information. Those are things that exist in physics, exist in computer science, and we're simply applying to art. And so we decided, let's see if the artist really favored symmetry or balance and things like this. And what we discovered was actually interesting. We were able, so far, to show, yes, artists loves balance. Actually, they put pieces in their pictures to make it more balanced, but they are not balancing as much as they could, meaning we can prove that they could have designed the frame that will be even more balanced than they have done. And now a big question is, okay, so artists are not striking for perfect balance, so why not? And one of the things we found is that there is a trade-off between balance and complexity, meaning balance is the amount of information you can put in a painting. The more information you put, the harder it is to balance things. And so what we discover is that there is a choice that people, and maybe this is obvious, maybe humanists will tell me, oh, Norberto, this we knew from a long time, but at least now I feel satisfied, because as a scientist I have scientific proof that this is the case. And what we found is that that there is choices that artists face between, for example, balance and information and so on. And different artists pick different routes. So, for example, we found that Titian, the famous Italian painter, and Da Vinci really emphasized balance and symmetry more than complexity, whether other painters prefer more the complexity. And it's very clear in the data. And so what was interesting to us is, okay, so this is a small step, but we can feel comfortable that we are taking humanity and analyzing it as deeply as a scientist can analyze. What is interesting is when I tell, when we made those discoveries, graphs that appear, my new postdoc was an artist, was elated. I mean, he did not say, "Oh, now you're spoiling art for me." That's not what was happening. What was happening is we suddenly had another level of beauty which we were able to understand. Now, whether this will make it to a robot in artificial intelligence in the future, maybe, because it's now we can actually write equations that explain this, right? Is it bad? I don't know if it is bad. I don't think it is bad that we understand what beauty is, or, I'm sorry, we understand a little fraction of what beauty is, right? But I think it's important. I think we found some window into human feeling that way, and to us was a great breakthrough. And it was only possible because we had humanists working together with scientists. Scientists really learn from the humanists these concepts. When my colleague, my postdoc, was trying to point out things to us, it's only that we realized that's what it means. And then we were able to write an equation and measure, if you understand what I'm trying to say. And so that's my feeling. I think there's a lot to be gained. Do you mind if I say another thing, or how are we?
Sure. No, go. We're getting to the end of the interview here, but I'd love to hear more. This has been fascinating.
So there is a book I read last year. I think we are in 2015, so that still is last year. It was almost 2 years ago, by a scientist, a Harvard scientist called E.O. Wilson. He's a famous guy because he has done good science, but also popularized science, made science available to other people. And the book was called "The Meaning of Human Existence." I don't know if you're familiar with the book, but I read that book flying in an airplane. I forget exactly where I was flying, maybe from USC to Georgetown, and it tells a story in that book that I felt really brings strongly to the front this notion of what I'm trying to tell you. So there was an imaginary story. Imagine an alien race, in somewhere far away in the galaxy, that has reached our level of science maybe 10 or 100 million years ago, and has progressed. And finally, they decided to come to Earth, very much like we go to nature to see plants and insects and things like this. So they came to Earth and saw humanity, and the question posed by E.O. Wilson was, what would call their attention? So he said, okay, so science is one thing we do, but our science probably juvenile, is really, very immature compared to that race. If the race was able to come here, they are far ahead of us. And so, and science presumably is the story of repeated things. So what happens here and what happened in that planet is more or less the same. The understanding is the same. So they will look at our science and say, it's just like the beginnings of our science. And so E.O. Wilson pointed out that the thing that will call their attention the most is culture, and the creativity and the variety of forms of expressions that we have as a species. That thing is completely unique. And for a foreign species, it will be what they will be most interested. And I find similar domains. I think, as I'm a scientist, I feel very comfortable in science, and I think science has contributed a lot to our progress as a species, as a you know, as the humans as a whole made life possible, prevented death of people by understanding germs and etc. But like E.O. Wilson, I feel that humanities are the soul of humankind, and I don't find a conflict between those two domains. I find that there is room for the two fields of endeavor to collaborate and learn a lot from each other. As we are trying to learn what's art, this my artist colleague is learning a lot of, wow, it is really possible to understand what happens in me when I paint, or beats, right? Beats, because there's a lot to be done. And so there is a lot of beautiful things that will come out, I think, by this partnership. That's what I'm trying to say. We should not, as scientists, be too conceited. If you think like E.O. Wilson was thinking, we should actually be partners rather than smugs. I think it's how I would put it.
Oh my gosh, it's the perfect way to end this conversation and the perfect way to end this interview. I thought, in fact, I'm going to go rush out. I've read quite a bit of E.O. Wilson. I have not read that one, and now you've got me hooked.
You enjoy.
But anyhow, this has been a fascinating conversation. It's taken the big picture, the very big picture. It's also gotten in down to the nitty-gritty of how actually humanities and science work together. And really, it's just been a delightful kind of conversation for me, and I'm sure for the audience. And we thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and lay out your thoughts with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me. I love to engage in this conversation, so it's a great opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.